So the panel discussion that we're going to initiate next is based on geography. We're looking at California through the lens of the Central Coast and then looking at it through the lens of the North Coast. And this morning you had the opportunity to hear from Nick Tiphon and the land base that we are on and with today is the Southern Pomo Coast Miwok tribal lands. And as Margot described her landscape, we moved north into what we know as California now. And so now we're going back to the Central Coast, and we're going to hear about the relationships that land managers, tribal members are having with fire related to this landscape of the Central Coast of California. So that is through, as again, a geographical lens. And I'm just fighting a little bit of time as everyone comes in. So on our panel for the Central Coast, we have Joe Rawitzer, Abran Lopez, and Sheppy. Each panelist will give an introduction of 5 minutes, so they will actually introduce themselves to you and their work. And then we are going to go into brief questions that I will ask to them, and then we will open it up for you to ask questions as well. So to begin, we're going to have Joe start with introductions, and Joe, I'm going to give you
Good morning. I'm Joe Rawitzer. I'm project coordinator for something known as the Central Coast Prescribed Fire Council. Let's see. Oh, there we go. And we formed in the state, right now there are 3 prescribed fire councils, one in Northern California, basically Highway 80 North. There's a Southern Sierra Prescribed Fire Council, Highway 80 South in the Sierras, and Central Coast, that's us. Between here, Marin County, and Vandenberg Air Force Base, Santa Barbara County. And how do we call that the Central Coast? Why is there a prescribed fire council in the Central Coast? Well, first of all, there aren't these hard boundary lines between Northern California and Central California. I think there might be one for Southern California, but fire regimes. What does fire behave like and act like in certain areas? So anyway, the short of it is, in Northern California, we have a what we call the Northern Fire Regime. There are various areas that are a little different, but from Marin County to Santa Barbara County, and it's just short of where the Santa Ana winds that we hear of that blow in Southern California. So just north of that, from the coast inland, is pretty much the Central Coast Fire Regime. So the species on the ground, the way fire behaves, the way the weather is fairly similar. So that's how we get to that. And anyway, this is generally the area that we are now, what we formed for was to support bringing fire back on the land. And the first people that we were starting to work with was the Amamutsan tribe. They're based out of like Santa Cruz, San Juan Bautista, Pinnacles area. It's in the Central Coast. But we started a training program to help tribal members gain the skills to bring that fire back onto the land. So I'm here to tell you it doesn't take any brains to light a fire.
I might disagree with that. It seems awfully hard to start a fire when you're trying to.
Well, yeah, it can be hard at times, especially if it's real wet and cold and it's winter and you didn't cut all your firewood back when you were supposed to. So I roamed the hills of California as a kid. I grew up in Monterey County, but I spent 20 years in Mendocino County, and that's North Coast. So my love for California came from basically my bare feet on the land. And one of the things I saw when I was a kid, before books and before they tried to teach me a bunch of stuff, was there's charcoal everywhere out there. And that was something that fascinated me because I could see that in the area that I grew up. Lots of oak trees, lots of other stuff too, but the oak trees seem to be the things that were talking to me. I say that now, talking to me. At the time it was curiosity, but I'd find these trees that had these burn scars and maybe were kind of weird shaped. The first speaker, there was that real wonderful picture of that large oak tree that was like it. Well, those kind of trees especially, and some of them are hollow, some of them are big enough to get inside even if you're a kid. So it made me wonder. And then later, when I was about 17, I happened to get a job with now CAL FIRE, CDF at the time, Department of Forestry. I thought it was going to be a job cleaning out garbage cans in parks or something like that. Anyway, I get to this place, first thing that happens, the horn goes off. What do? Get on the truck. Which one? The red one. That really happened. Oh, gee, you actually get paid for this? So my start was in suppressing wildfires, and back then, which was a long time ago, the 60s, early 70s, put them out, prevent fires. Only you could prevent forest fires. We have to prevent fire. Well, that's a good idea sometimes. But what we've learned since then is, uh-oh, we were in reverse with that. So anyway, we started, better go quicker here. Anyway, education. And we hosted a Good Fire Day, actually down in Carmel Valley area, and we happened to get this picture. And that says a lot of things to me, because what we need to do is educate people as to the right way to put fire back on the land. And we work with landowners looking at a landscape scale basis. Right? Where there's smoke, there's fire. This actually is a recent picture taken up on the Klamath, just north of the Yurok area with the Karuk tribe. But this is tribal people putting fire back on the land. And that's what it looks like right after. A lot of people used to think, ooh, that's bad. The fire went through and destroyed the forest or destroyed that land. We can't wait till next spring to see what this is going to look like and the year after. And everybody's happy after a fire. This is actually the burned over area next year. So anyway, working with tribal members, we also go up to the Klamath and work each year with the Yurok and Karuk tribes. And right after me, Abran Lopez, a member of the Alamutsan tribe, is going to tell a bit about his story, how their tribe is working to put fire back on the land. I want to be real quick. My background was in fire suppression, but before that I grew up on a cattle ranch. We used to burn every year, either our ranch or other ranches around. Then I started suppressing them. Then we started lighting them again. So here we are. I'm kind of an old guy, but we're able to mentor and pass on the skills that are necessary to actually put fire back on the ground without it getting away and burning the town down. So that's really what we're doing. And this is an exercise we had last year near Vacaville. We get a bunch of young people and a bunch of older people get together, light a bunch of fire, and we're talking about what just happened in the burn we just did there in this picture. Here is a training. This is out at the Tassajara Zen Mountain Center in the middle of the Ventana Wilderness in Monterey County. We'll be going into our 5th year of an academy there. We teach Buddhist monks how to fight fire, and they're very good at it. And we're almost finished. These are tribal members, 2 female members, 2 years ago, up on the Klamath, learning to put fire back on the ground, as Margot was describing earlier. And there are the new shoots from the oak tree, and that's kind of a good picture, and the mountain is burning right in front of headquarters. This is new. This didn't used to happen. So I think I'll leave it at that picture there. Thank you.
My name is Lopez. I'm a member of the Alamutsan Tribal Band and also the Deputy Director for our Stewardship Corps. I'm on the Board of Directors for our Stewardship Corps and a member of the Central Coast Prescribed Fire Council. I've been working on our tribal lands for the last over 5 years now. We engage in cultural restoration and also land restoration in our traditional territories. One of the big things that kind of brought me into meeting Joe and working along with people like him and the Karuk and other tribal entities that we get to get the opportunity and the privilege to work with is you keep putting my foot in my mouth when we go to work and we'd be talking about how we're trying to mimic fire. Okay, well we're coming in here, we're clearing out these plants to help out this coastal grassland prairie to mimic fire. We're removing this to mimic fire. And, well, how come they're not burning here? You know, how come they're not burning? We, kept bugging about that until one day, hey, we got some training going on up in the mountains with some Buddhist monks. You want to go? So I was like a deer in the headlights and everything. So, but I'd already put my foot in my mouth, and I had had a lot of times in my life where kind of having to recheck myself, and it was always my culture that brought me back in, and it kind of saved my backside, So I felt like I had a big debt to pay for it. And like a lot of people from Mission Indian stock like myself, some of us we do have some traditionals that have those that knowledge, but they're few and far between, and a lot of them are city Indians like me that just some of us don't even have access to some of this stuff. So when I had my opportunity and that ability to work with our tribe and our land trust and really work towards helping out other tribal members like myself that want to become active in the community and want to be able to own our native, our Indian, our own that culture. It was really nice, and so that's what brought me to meet Joe, was putting my foot in my mouth and going out and getting trained to learn how to be a modern day firefighter, because I felt like it should be in my body to know how to do this stuff, but there's a lot of things that changed over the last 100 years, or during this regime, during contact and fire suppression policies. So I know you can't just go back the old way and just go do it the old way. So we had to go and learn about fire policy, learn about how to fight fire nowadays, modern day, to make it meet the new world or the world that it is today, do this pragmatically. And so it's been a long road, from learning invasive removal and learning fuel reductions and learning wildland fire and ignitions training and getting the opportunity to meet a lot of really good, intelligent people, not just from the academic community and the fire community and the forestry community, but also really prominent and like the women we had here today. I feel fortunate just to be blessed to be around that, and to see that, experience that, and to have that in my life. So yeah, it's been quite a ride. I've even got to meet a lot of people from even this area, the tribal people of the coastal Miwok and Southern Pomo, helping out with people that were involved in the archaeological aspects of what we do, and learning from a scientific and on what the communities and what was burned in our homelands when we implemented it there. So it's just been a really wild ride, a beautiful one, and hopefully someday bringing fire home is the ultimate goal. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Sheppy. I work for the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. It's the nonprofit partner of the national parks. And what I do is I bring community out into restoration projects, habitat restoration projects. And one of our fundamental beliefs is that an area, an ecosystem is not restored, is not healed until there is a community of humans that are taking care of it and care about it. And that's really going to protect and keep the health and longevity of that ecosystem thriving is with that community. So a lot of what I'm trying to do is bring people back to do restoration work. When I think of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, I think of biodiversity and the diversity of the plants and the animal species that we have and of the ecosystems we have. And a couple things to kind of hit that home is that the Conservation International, it's an international conservation organization, was looking at what they call biodiversity hotspots, or areas across the world where there was higher amounts of plant and animal diversity and of species that were endemic or only were evolved in certain locations. And of course, California was considered a biodiversity hotspot. So we have a greater I feel a greater responsibility to our land and to the world because of the uniqueness of our land. And the Bay Area, we know that. There's, in the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, we have redwood forest, oakwood forest, wetlands, rivers, all of those things. Another thing that I think is interesting when I'm thinking about the Bay Area is another thing, the United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization was looking at these biodiversity hotspots and specifically looking at areas with high human populations. And they created this term called a biosphere reserve. And this Bay Area is considered a biosphere reserve. And what they're doing is they're bringing organizations together like the national parks and other kind of land agencies and cultural agencies, because the struggles that we face in the Bay Area with the balance of lots of people and also lots of really intact ecosystems and the conflicts and the opportunities that we have in the Bay Area, this is a model and a lab for really the rest of the world, because we know that populations are going to be increasing, and the struggles that we have here today and the solutions that we come up with here today are really going to be a model for the rest of the world. So these are some of the things that I think about and get me inspired. So what does this have to do with fire? What we know is that fire is an important part of managing these ecosystems. In the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, we have 36 endangered plants and animal species. So these are species that are going to go extinct or threaten to go extinct without our help. And what it's showing us is that we have diversity, but it's breaking, and that our ecosystems are getting sick, and that the fabric and the interwovenness of these plants and the animals are beginning to fray. And we really need to do something to keep these ecosystems healthy. Not just for enjoyment, not just for recreation, but because we know that these ecosystems provide clean water, provide clean air, and for the health of our communities. So where's fire in all of this? So some of the stuff that the park has been doing is we've done a survey, it's called Looking at Mount Tamalpais, and we've been surveying the ecosystems and which ecosystems are healthy and which are threatened. We've identified that grasslands really need fire. In 2011, we did a prescribed fire in Gerbode Valley, which is in the Marin Headlands, which is a pretty big intact area. The goal was to burn out tall fescue, and then we planted back in a diversity of native grasses and wildflowers. We could luckily do that in that area. The other ecosystem that we're looking at is chaparral, and chaparral is another ecosystem which really needs fire. The plant species in chaparral, they need to be burned. The seeds need to have contact with fire in order for those seeds to germinate. And so in the next couple of years, we're looking up at Bolinas Ridge to do some prescribed fire in the chaparral ecosystems there. So in areas where we can't do prescribed fire, we're doing a lot of mimicking of fires, so cutting down eucalyptus trees, also just doing some scrub clearing to open up grasslands, focusing on species to clear out those grasslands. And that's my time. So I'll tell you more with the next question.
If we could actually have you answer this first question, and each of you will subsequently answer it. what are the guiding principles or value sets that are defining the land management for the Conservancy in this case? And could you describe those guiding principles maybe in action as well?
So I'm with the Conservancy, the nonprofit partner of the park. So a lot of what we do is take our cue from the park. So the park's really mission is to protect park language, the natural resources, and the cultural resources. So we're trying to honor just the plants and the animals that are there, and then also the many different cultures and the histories and the stories that are in the land. And then we want to provide for recreation, and we also want to provide for the unforeseeable, for the indefinite future. So what's our value? So we understand that we need to bring back natural cycles to keep our ecosystems healthy. So fire is really important in many of our ecosystems. And bringing back the stories of the people who used fires in the land. Safety is another really big thing. In the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, we have homes right next to our open spaces. So working with what's the wildlife urban interface and really trying to create protection corridors so that when fires do happen, that we're able to keep people safe is really important. In Yosemite and other areas that are bigger, what's really neat is they have a let burn policy where if a fire is created, and they're just going to let it burn because they understand how important fire is to an ecosystem. We technically have that policy here, but we also have to manage the fact that some areas are open where we can kind of let fire do its thing, but other areas we have lots of homes. So with that, with the fact and understanding that we're so connected to people living in these open spaces, a lot of the work that we're doing with Joe is this idea of creating good fire symposiums and educating people about the importance of fire so that when fire does happen, people aren't really scared, and so that and then maybe hopefully you guys will all be inspired and you'll call the park and you'll say, you know what, we need more fire. So that we can do more prescribed burning because smoke goes up and it does impact people, and if people aren't aware of why burning is important, they complain, and that really can shut down prescribed fires.
Thank you. And can I ask you one question about goats?
Oh yeah.
Mia Monroe is someone I interviewed prior to developing this panel, and she had said that there was some activity. Do you mind just mentioning the guiding value is the urban interface, and so how you navigate urban interface with ungulates in this case?
Yeah, so we've had some great goat, having bringing goats on the land. One was at Fort Mason. It was called East Black Point, and we brought in goats. City Grazing was the company that did it, and they were able to clear out an area that was a lot of blackberries, a lot of things as well. And then also we had a historic Nike missile site that had a lot of just blackberries and things. So we were able to bring goats into that area. And then we could follow up with once the biomass got down, we were able to come in with a crew and remove everything so that we could redo a planting. So goats are super important as kind of the first wave into an area to drop the biomass or the weeds or however you want to think about it, so that we then can come in with a smaller crew and do work. So they are really important with that.
Thank you so much. And sorry, I have one more quick.
Great.
So I see a friend and a colleague here I know is Butterfly Barbara, and I just wanted to ask about entomological cycles real quick. And do you have anyone on staff that looks at those cycles as you prescribe different biomass reduction strategies?
So one of the areas in our grasslands, we have an endangered mission blue butterfly, and what's really, it's an interesting thing that butterfly needs healthy grasslands. It feeds on lupin that grows in these grasslands. And we've done some burn plots in areas to see if lupins, it seemed like, need a fire or need some sort of disturbance in order to grow. So in order to maintain these endangered butterfly populations, we need to have some form of disturbance, whether it's fire or mechanical scarring of the land, in order to get these host plants, which are these lupins, to regerminate in our grasslands. And it's really interesting because at the same time we're burning these lands, the butterflies, we're burning the butterflies, and they're an endangered butterfly. But what we found is that actually the butterflies in their caterpillar form can survive a burn by like going into the ground, and we're not quite sure how they do that, but we were surprised to see that there were caterpillars that survived after a burn went through. Yeah.
Thank you. And so Joe, do you want me to restate the question, the original question? Okay, so what are the guiding principles and or value sets that are defining land management practices in the agencies that you're interfacing with, or you can speak about it personally, and or both?
Yeah, that's a good one. The guiding principle is, for me, it's been the observation that there are cycles, and one of the ones that's been missing is the fire cycle. And so the guiding principle for me kind of came from observation, then my experience in suppressing fire, and in the areas, not around houses, but in the areas where we were spending millions of dollars, us, I mean the other firefighters, to suppress and put these fires out, and having grown up on those same hills, wait a minute, this fire's doing nothing but good. Why did we just spend $1 million this afternoon? So that's not one of my guiding principles. So then turn around and go, wait, what's needed? Well, this is easy. We put fire across the landscape, not during the height of fire season, not when the wind's blowing, but when we know that there's going to be that low to moderate intensity, okay? And then just wait for next spring, or wait 2.5 weeks or 3 weeks, and the sprouts are coming back, you start polishing your lands. That's the guiding principle. And then seeing that not just fire, because we can't burn like in pre-settlement, wherever there were populations, the burning was occurring pretty much every day, every year, right? Maybe not always in the same place, but where the basket stuff was happening it was regular and frequent. And then further out, so, fire and grazing together, guess what works? And they work best with each other. Either single, just grazing, I'm talking about landscape scale. The kind of burning I've been involved with in the past mostly is our large landscape scale burns, 500 to 1,000 to 6,000 acres at a time type. Now that doesn't mean Holocaust, but that means a lot of acres at a time, so that we're actually making a difference on the landscape. So how do we maintain the good values, the benefits of a good burn is with grazing. How do we improve the grazing with good burning? Now it's not just grazing or not just burning or it's not just removing the brush, is that when you're doing it, all of those values are coming together. Now science, we have to dice all this stuff up and figure out why things are happening, and we have to do the flow chart and all that stuff. All you have to do is take a walk through an area where a burn has been, where good grazing is happening, and you just see everybody's happy. The species are happy, you're usually happy. And that's been my guiding principle. So then coming back around to, we have to figure out how to burn today. Now we have to relearn to burn. Wait a minute, it's always been there. There's some of us that actually know how to do it. There are people who know how to do it. What works? The cultural model, right? The indigenous populations already figured out what fire-safe communities are. They knew what fire-wise management was. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's my guiding principle.
Thank you. And Abran, do you want to speak to both the personal guiding principles and also what you've learned as you've reintroduced some of the tribe's values into your daily experience?
So yeah, it's interesting how it's fleshed itself out as you go along, and a lot of it was there from the beginning. But yeah, as far as the land trust organization and the tribe altogether, it's well understood within our culture how important not only fire and having that relationship with the land was, and I think that if that was the central theme in everything we do, it comes down to that. We have one of our tribal members talks about our obligations, and that's, to me, in my roundabout way of saying it, that's what it all draws back to me is when I was a kid, I grew up Christian. You hear a lot about, oh, well, God gave man dominion over the earth or something like that or whatever, but it's, you're the top one out there. You're the smartest one, supposedly, or whatever. It's not dominion, it's a responsibility, and if you can change things and you can affect things so much, but just because of your selfishness, you're not going to consider all those, it's like when they had mentioned earlier, cultural bearers know it better than anybody else, like what's in every little thing out here, those spirits, those, when you don't consider that stuff, I mean, we've made ourselves so numb to it as a people in a whole, that we've done some things to our Mother Earth that, we like to talk about how we're going to destroy the earth, we're going to destroy ourselves, and I think a lot of people are agreeing now and realizing what our culture and what the basis of our beliefs and our relationship to our mother has been, and the benefit of that. It's not some crazy idea. It's taking care of our people in the long run. Yeah, I can become a millionaire tomorrow by doing some shady business. But is the ripples that I'm going to make, is that going to affect my great-great-grandchildren? And even if it doesn't, it might affect something that's going to affect them, or should I have that callous of a heart that I don't realize all the other things I'm destroying around me? And so, that idea that, yeah, those ripple effects are huge, and if we all considered that and kind of pumped our brakes on things and really thought it out, observed it, and okay, well, yeah, we need to check this out. We need to double take on this. And I'm kind of going on a tangent, but I'm bringing it back to where with fire, that's a big thing that popped off in my head. I love what a lot of the conservationist community's done with being able to protect things. But if we're so arrogant to think that we're above this Mother Earth and we're not a part of it, that we can just keep fire out, a natural part of its cycle, and think that that's not affecting it. It's like, we're not going to touch it. Well, you're keeping fire out. That's touching it big time. So yeah, it's a responsibility, and to know when, how to implement fire in a good way to where it's gonna, it's gonna be able to let nature do and be the best that it can. I've worked in enough places to see, some of these species that just run rampant, and they could even be a native one. And, I've seen, I love tan oaks, but I've seen stands of tan oaks that are just so thick that you're like, there's hardly anything growing under it. Part of what I've been doing recently is we've been doing fuel reductions in Kidoste. And, it's something I've been wanting to do forever. When are we going to be able to take this to the next level? We're there now. We're out there, thinning out some of the Doug firs. And a lot of people, they love Doug firs. I love Doug firs. They smell good. They're pretty, but, they're a big fire hazard. They're almost like a weed. They grow almost everywhere. And you go inside some of them thick, Doug fir stands, there ain't nothing growing under there. You got those nice ones where maybe a fire came through or there's been some work done, and there's some beautiful plants under there. Many of the plants that were shown by our basket weavers here that are useful, medicine plants, I mean, even if you're just into biodiversity, you know, it's a better place to go and see. You know, it's beautiful and a lot of different animals there. But you go into these areas that's just is overgrown with some of these stuff. They're fire hazards. They're not really fun to walk through, and it's not good for biodiversity. But yeah, I think that's just kind of, from my perspective, you know, where we've been kind of going with, at least with moving towards fire, and you know, with cultural is the main aspect of that.
Thank you, Abran. I think Joe wanted to chime
Yeah,
in.
just my other guiding principle came back to me. And it was taught to me, especially my first year as a firefighter, a long time ago by an old crusty guy, but we don't make a decision based on fear. We don't make emotional decisions. Boots on the ground, stay calm, think clearly, act decisively. So there's a principle in there, because if we're emotional based or fear based, particularly on the fire line, there's going to be a problem. So you have to keep an inner stillness and calmness about it. So you'll actually know what to do next if you stay still with it. And of course we have the overarching rule, don't screw up.
Is this why the Buddhist monks make good firefighters? Is this why the Buddhist monks at Tassajara are such good students?
Actually, that was been a great experience. When we were first asked to go train Buddhist monks in a monastery, we rolled our eyes. Oh man, what about, you know, this is going to be interesting. But I have to report that it's been one of the best experiences for all parties. They were already lined up about how to pay attention, how to be still, right? You put 25 students in a classroom, right? Those of you who've done any teaching, there's always one, right? Or two or three. Didn't have that. Yeah, there might have been one kind of, but there's always that in any population. But the attention fit right in with the training. So anyway, we've had a successful relationship.
Thank you. So I'm going to jump to question 3 and give each of you about 2 minutes for this question about just a real-time example. I think that's why each of you was such a critical piece for this panel. Was you're practitioners, you're out on the land, and you have real-time boots on the ground experience, and that's what's so valuable to this audience who may not have those day-to-day experiences, is that they get to hear from you. So could you describe, after elucidating your guiding values and principles, a real-time anecdote of those in action, where you experienced a prescriptive, or to Nick's point, a cultural burn, that, you know, there were guiding decisions in what you were doing that you could elucidate, and the actual practice. So again, an example of a burn that you want to talk about, and you can do popcorn style.
Yeah.
Bryce, you want to start?
Yeah, I want to talk about a burn. I work with San Bruno Mountain Watch, and San Bruno Mountain is a county park, and this wasn't a prescribed burn, but this was a moment where kids lit a fire and it burned Owl Canyon. And then we came back in the springtime to look at what that was. And this was the moment we brought out a whole bunch of botanists and to set this up. There was in the early in like 1910, there was a botanist who went out and wrote down every single plant species that was on that mountain, and we have that list. And there was huge missing species that we had never been able to see, and for years people had never been able to see these species. And we took like 5 botanists and we went up on the burn site, and it burned, and then we had rains, and so everything was coming back. And we got like just 50 feet, into the area, and everyone just stopped because they were like, "Oh my God, is that a wind poppy? Oh my God, I've never seen that species before. Oh my God, what is that?" And what it was those seeds were lying dormant in the soil waiting for a fire, and it had just been that long before the fire had come. And not only was it spectacularly beautiful, more wildflowers than I'd ever seen, but there were all these new species that people hadn't seen. And that was one of those moments where you're like, wow, this was impactful. And everyone just immediately seeing that was like, fire is so important. And then I also want to mention the fact that since it was a burn that wasn't intentional, it started out in an area of French broom. And French broom can be really destructive to grasslands. And what happened with that burn was that French broom patch rapidly expanded into other grassland areas. And so there is a balance that we have to understand, and why it's called a prescribed burn and not just random burning is you have to look and you have to balance these things, and you have to find best practices. So I've seen the benefit, and I've seen that you also have to come in and sometimes you have to remove out weedy species before you do a burn so that you can get the most benefit of it. So it is a dance, and we are learning a lot from unintentional and from intentional burning practices.
Thank you, that was a wonderful story. And Joe, how about you?
I really have to say, every burn is that way. There's an aspect to it, or aspects to it. Even if you think you know what you're doing, it's two things that come to my mind. It's the deer rolling in the hot ashes. The burn isn't finished, the mountain's still burning. But on the backside that got burned earlier in the morning, here are the deer hanging out and rolling in the hot ashes. And on the same burn, and this is why I'm saying it's like all burns are like this. There's some element of that going on. And I think for me, I'm sitting here, I'm trying to figure out what was the one answer to this question. There isn't. Every well-done burn, the one that doesn't hurt anybody or doesn't burn the town down or someone's house down, that's a good burn. So, and also just for those of you, prescription, we think everybody knows what that means, but that's a specific set of conditions chosen for desired outcomes. So, and not that there's a lot of variation in those conditions, but when we burn, we look at that very closely. It's not just random. So that's what we mean with a prescribed burn, is we're looking at intended outcomes, what's a desirable outcome. But every burn's a good burn that doesn't hurt somebody. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
For me, I'm going to kind of veer off a little bit on it because the burn I'm looking forward to, a lot of the burns I got to be on were in Karuk territory, and I enjoyed those as well, but the one that I'm looking forward to most personally is out at the homeland, and it hasn't happened yet, and yeah, it's been a long wait and a lot of work, and you never know when it's the chance is going to happen, but just keep working towards it. We're doing fuel reductions in a place that we never thought we'd be doing that level of work at. We're out there, felling some trees. We're trying to prep an area to get it to where it'll be a little bit more fire resilient. We're actually in talks of maybe even being able to participate in pilot burns of some of the material that we've rounded up. And it's been actually the first place that I worked in with my tribe for a stewardship course. So, excuse me sounding all cliche and everything, but I put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into that place. It may never happen. It's a very sensitive place. It's a very important place for us. I love working there. It's like a second home. And yes, maybe sooner than later we'll at least get to see piles there. Maybe someday even a broadcast if, Creator, God, whatever you want to call it, willing, and things happen right, and we can do it safely and with the support of the, the communities around us, because that's the only way it's going to be good, is if we're all together, walking hand in hand, so that's why I come out. I'm not a big fan of public speaking, so I do this sort of thing because I really want to see this sort of thing happen, but and I want to see us all do it together and all see the beauty from it. I'll see what we can get from it. It's not just a me thing or my culture thing, it's an art thing, because we're all in this together now, so yeah, that's what I really want to see, and I think it might be possible. Like I said, when I started out, hand saws, little tiny hand saws cutting down Doug firs that were this big, with loppers cutting out, a little bit of a coyote brush trying to open up this coastal grassland prairie, sitting there, you know, working my backside off, looking at it, just like, man, are we even making a difference? I'm out there now with the, you know, 461, and I'm like, okay, I actually can see what I'm doing now, you know? And so, they said the sky's the limit, you know, as long as you keep doing the right things and, you know, you carry yourself in a good way and you do it for the right reasons, I feel. So.
Thank you so much. So we actually, questions will have to be asked to the panelists individually. I'm sorry for time, but I just also wanted to say in conversation with especially with Joe and Abran, because of their time out in the field, they came today because this conversation kept occurring on the phone. Well, so the audience is going to be interested in this work, right? Like they're gonna hear and they're gonna want to participate in some way. And so I would invite you, we'll send out information, but tracking how these prescriptive and or cultural burns are taking place on the landscape as a community, and starting to learn more about the differences between prescriptive burn and catastrophic, and learning about how we're going to walk hand in hand, as Abran said, together. That was really what I was hoping would derive out of this particular panel, because it's hard to get these guys out of the field, I'll say. So.
And you didn't hand us a script.
And I didn't. And there's a beautiful book too on the Tassajara monks. Is it Wildfire Monks that was written?
Fire monks.
Fire Monks, if you'd like to read it. And so thank you. Let's do another round of applause.